My wife asked if she could go to an after-party at her boss's house after the party, but my answer shocked her. "You can go, just don't come home as my wife again," I said calmly, as if I had already understood everything. That night, I left with the dignity she had lost by hiding the truth. The worst part of infidelity isn't the discovery, but the time spent believing a lie, building moments with someone who was no longer fully present, sharing the routine with someone who was already giving pieces of what was meant to be ours to someone else. That night was just the culmination of a plot that began long before. It began with empty excuses, subtle changes in behavior, more distant touches, absences disguised as commitments. It began when she started smiling at her phone with the screen face down. When she started taking longer showers, arriving later, going to bed earlier, and losing the sparkle in her eyes every time I told her I loved her. There were no screams. There was no scandal. There was only silence. And in the silence, I understood everything. I didn't need proof, screenshots, or confessions. I only needed a moment of lucidity. True love has a scent, a sound, a presence. And she no longer exuded any of that. The scent of our love had been replaced by a new perfume she said she'd received from a friend. The sound of our connection had been silenced by hastily typed messages, and the presence was just a body beside me, soulless, without truth, without us. That night, hearing her request with such nonchalance, as if it were something routine, banal, almost innocent, I understood that there was no turning back. I looked at her with the serenity of someone who had already cried enough hidden in the car, in the shower, during sleepless nights, lying next to a woman who no longer belonged to me, but who pretended she still was. I answered without anger, without apparent pain, without scandal, but with a sentence: "You can go, just don't come back home as my wife." And she went. She went without looking back, as if she believed she was heading towards something better. Perhaps she thought that this new love would be freedom. That the butterflies in her stomach from a secret affair were worth more than the peace of a stable love. Perhaps she wanted to prove to herself that she was still desired, alive, powerful. And perhaps, at that moment, she truly believed she was trading a lukewarm relationship for an overwhelming passion. What she didn't know is that passions that begin in the shadows rarely withstand the light of day. The first few days were silent torture. Her absence screamed in every corner of the house. The cup she used, the perfume she left scattered around the room, the old notes kept in a drawer, the bed that seemed gigantic. But I endured it. I endured it because there was no more room for illusion. And because inside me, something had already died a long time ago. What hurt wasn't losing her, it was losing what I thought we were. The image we built for the world, the idea of a future she erased with one decision. While she was experiencing the ecstasy of novelty, I learned to live with the leftovers of myself. And it was in this process that something unexpected happened. I reconnected with myself. I discovered strengths I didn't even know I had. I learned to take care of myself, to occupy my time, to value silence as a companion and not as an enemy. I learned that loving someone cannot cost you your own dignity. That forgiving is liberating, but trusting again is another story. And that some people only learn the value of what they had when they lose it forever. Months later, our paths crossed. It was casual. A brief encounter, somewhere. She was different. Her gaze was duller, her posture more fragile. She tried to hide it, tried to smile, but her eyes don't lie. She wanted to talk. She spoke of longing, of confusion, of how things hadn't turned out as she imagined. She said that her relationship with her boss ended as quickly as it began. That he never wanted anything serious, that she felt used, empty, discarded. That, in the end, she realized I was everything she wanted. Everything she needed. But that she realized it too late. I listened to everything. With respect, with empathy, with maturity. Because there was no longer any resentment in me. Only one unshakable certainty: I didn't want back someone who didn't know how to keep me. I was already with someone else. A woman who arrived without haste, without empty promises, without games. A woman who didn't need to lose me to value me. Who didn't need to hide her phone or invent excuses. Who gave me back the pleasure of lightness, peace, and confidence. And it was at that moment, looking at that repentant woman in front of me, that I realized the difference between love and attachment. She was attached to what she destroyed, I was in love with what I rebuilt. She tried to get back together. She begged. She said she loved me, that she was grateful for everything, that she regretted it from the bottom of her heart. And I believed her regret. But I didn't take her back. Because some doors, once closed, shouldn't be reopened. Not out of pride, but out of respect for one's own history. I forgave her. Truly. But I forgave her to move on lightly, not to go back. Each of us went our own way. And, as they say, life is fair. She reaped what she sowed, and so did I. She reaped uncertainty, loneliness, and regret. I reaped peace, love, and a new beginning. But what she never knew, and perhaps never will, is that the day I saw her again and refused her request to get back together wasn't the hardest part of this story. The hardest part was the time I spent believing I wasn't enough. That maybe the mistake was mine. That I should have been more romantic, more present, younger, more handsome, more anything. It took me time to understand that betrayal doesn't define the betrayed, but the betrayer. And when that realization hit me, I was freed. But there's something she never discovered. Something that changed everything. Something that, if she had known, perhaps she would never have left. Something that explains why, even months later, there was still an open wound within her. A detail of the story that she completely ignored. And that detail is what transformed all the pain I lived through into an eternal lesson. She traded real love for an illusion, but what she didn't imagine is that the love she threw away wasn't just mine. It was hers too. It was ours. And the way she lost it still haunts her every night. Because when, unknowingly, she finds her ex-husband in the arms of a woman she knew and despised long ago, everything she denied feeling comes rushing back. And the past exacts its price. After all, how can she bear to see the love of her life smiling with another woman, when all she wanted was to go back in time? And she wanted it. But it was too late. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize and never support any form of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry profound truths, because betrayal, in real life, destroys trust, corrodes love, and changes destinies forever. Get ready. What follows is an intense story, full of twists and turns, raw emotions, and real consequences. Sit down. Take a deep breath. The truth will hurt. Good story. They met on an ordinary night, the kind of encounter no one expects to change the course of an entire life. Between glasses of wine at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, Ethan and Olivia's eyes met for the first time. He had arrived late, exhausted from a grueling week at the office, and she was almost leaving, tired of the boring conversation around her. But a light exchange, a joke delivered at the right moment, was enough to make the whole atmosphere seem to disappear around them. There was something in that initial exchange, a familiar comfort mixed with the pleasant anxiety of being in the presence of someone she seemed to have known for years. Ethan, with his reserved manner and calm smile, found in Olivia a vibrant energy, a woman with a firm voice, intelligent, with a curiosity that challenged the world around her. And Olivia, who considered herself too rational for romantic idealizations, felt a strange desire to stay. The relationship didn't begin with explosive intensity. It built over time, almost like a solid friendship that gradually became a necessity. The first few months were marked by small discoveries. He liked to write by hand, kept movie tickets, spoke kindly to strangers, and had a curious habit of organizing books by emotion, not by author. She didn't drink coffee, loved to dance alone around the house, had the terrible habit of forgetting her cell phone anywhere, and collected postcards from places she'd never been. The differences, instead of driving them apart, seemed to align them in a peculiar way. like pieces that, even if they didn't fit perfectly, molded themselves to create something unique. It wasn't a chaotic passion, it was a firm construction, admired by everyone around them. The kind of couple that provokes good envy, because they seemed like accomplices even in silence. Over time, they shared a small apartment on a quiet street. A place with natural light, light-colored walls, and plants everywhere, all cared for by Olivia, who said she needed to see life growing around her to feel at home. Ethan made breakfast on weekends, wrote notes stuck to the refrigerator door, and learned to appreciate white wine just to accompany her choices. They created a routine that wasn't boring, but welcoming. Simple dinners on the balcony, watching series together on the cramped sofa, light discussions about books and politics, shared laughter while washing dishes late at night. There was, between them, a delicate construction of affection, respect, and care, not perfect, but genuine. The two always seemed in sync, even in their disagreements. When they disagreed, it was with words, not shouting. Ethan was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, and Olivia had a habit of arguing logically, even in moments of emotion. Conflicts arose as in any mature relationship, but there was always a sincere effort from both to return to the center, to resolve things before drifting apart. He cared about the details, she about the whole. He planned, she improvised. He was confident, she intense. And somehow, this balanced them. Friends commented on how well they complemented each other. Families from opposite sides of the country came to visit and said, with a twinkle in their eyes, that there was something special there. At Sunday lunches and holiday parties, they were always the ones who seemed to know exactly how to take care of each other. Time passed and priorities shifted. Olivia began to grow professionally, gaining ground in a competitive field where women were still a minority. She was a determined, ambitious woman, eager to demonstrate her abilities. Her world began to expand. More events, more trips, more after-hours meetings. Ethan, on the other hand, maintained a more serene pace. He continued his work as a copywriter, something he enjoyed but that didn't demand the same sacrifices. He was happy with what they had built and satisfied with the small daily victories. He was a man of stability, of long-term plans, and he saw in her growth a silent pride, even when he felt the distance between them beginning to emerge in almost imperceptible details. The days grew busier. Olivia, increasingly involved in the corporate world, began arriving late, leaving early, and responding more hastily. Ethan noticed the changes, but didn't make a fuss. He believed in what they had built. He thought that phases existed, that she needed his support at that moment, that mature love knew how to give space when necessary. He continued to prepare dinner, to wait on the balcony, to leave affectionate notes, even when they were no longer found on the refrigerator door. He continued to ask how her day was, even when the answers were vague, and to try to keep their couple's rituals alive, even when Olivia no longer cared to participate in all of them. There was a patient love in him, and in her a whirlwind of desires and achievements that carried her further and further. Despite the subtle distance, the two still shared moments of connection. Short trips when they could coordinate their schedules, nights they laughed late into the night remembering the beginning of it all, exchanged glances that said without words that something real was still there. Olivia still hugged him tightly on some Sundays, as if she needed that embrace to recharge. Ethan, although he felt the weight of the growing imbalance, believed it was a phase, that soon everything would return to normal. There was still love in her gestures, even if more spaced out. There was still affection, even if divided by exhaustion and new commitments. But time, silently, reshaped the foundations of their relationship. That apartment, once full of laughter, now lived through long periods of silence. Ambient music was replaced by speakerphone meetings, tranquil nights were invaded by constant notifications, and physical presence no longer guaranteed connection. Ethan began to write more, perhaps trying to fill the voids that arose within him. His texts changed tone. They became more melancholic, more introspective. Olivia didn't notice. She was always rushing, always busy, always searching for something she perhaps didn't even know how to name. And he, always there. Observing. Loving in silence. Even with the growing emotional distance, Ethan never stopped loving her. It was a love that endured, that waited, that believed it was all temporary. He didn't want to lose her. And she, well, maybe she didn't want to lose him either, but she was too distracted to notice that she was already losing him. Deep down, she still felt loved. She believed their bond was strong enough to withstand any storm. And perhaps it was. If they were both holding the same umbrella. Their 3-year anniversary arrived with a painful simplicity. No dinner out, no gifts exchanged. Olivia had forgotten. Ethan didn't complain. He simply left a note on the bed, saying how grateful he still was to have her by his side, and that he understood the difficult times. She read it late at night, silently, unsure how to react. She was tired. Full. Exhausted. But, deep down, moved. And yet, she left the note on the table without replying. Ethan noticed. And didn't comment. The disconnect became more evident, but it was never spoken aloud. There were no confrontations, no fights. Only silence. A silence that screamed. An absence that hurt, even though they shared the same roof. And then came the invitation to Olivia's company party. An important, formal event, one of those where all the relevant names in the market would be present. She invited him, but in a perfunctory manner. Ethan politely declined, saying that she shone brighter when she was alone. It wasn't irony. It was the truth. He no longer wanted to be a burden at a party where he felt invisible. That night, he saw her walk out the door in a dress that seemed tailor-made for her. She looked beautiful. And distant. He smiled, but inside, something was slowly breaking. Olivia didn't even notice. She was too busy trying to fit into the new world she was building. And Ethan, alone on the sofa, drank a glass of wine and wondered, for the first time, if there was still room for him in her life. Hours later, when she called asking if she could go to an after-party at her boss's house, everything changed. But that wasn't the end yet. It was just the beginning of what would really turn everything upside down. The rain fell lightly that gray afternoon, as if the weather had decided to match the silence that invaded every corner of the house. Ethan looked at himself in the bedroom mirror, his beard unshaven, his eyes deeper, a strange weariness hanging from his eyelids. He no longer tried to understand what had changed, he just accepted it. Love, for him, was made of persistence, but even the most persistent learn to let go when everything has been tried. In recent days, he had begun to slowly distance himself, not in gestures, but in spirit. He began to organize his life into invisible boxes, what remained of him, what had been theirs, and what would never be again. Olivia was still sleeping on the other side of the bed when he left that morning for a walk, as he had been doing for the past few weeks. Walking had become a way to breathe, to think, and to understand how one loses someone who is still within reach. But that morning everything would change. Because eyes, when they've seen too much, perceive things that the naive still refuse to accept. And Ethan, that day, had finally seen everything. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was an accumulation of silences, of hastily spoken phrases, of empty presences, of cold kisses. And of a message, a single message left unintentionally in a notification glanced at on Olivia's phone screen. A name, an emoji, an intimate tone. All there, in seconds. But he didn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to feel, process, understand how far it had gone. And when Olivia returned home that night, smiling nervously and asking to go to an after-party at her boss's house, Ethan simply took a deep breath and replied with the calm of someone no longer afraid of the answer. He said she could go, but that she shouldn't come back as his wife. She froze. She didn't know what to say. She tried to laugh, as if it were a joke. But Ethan's gaze silenced her. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't ask for explanations. He simply said, with his eyes, that he knew. And she knew. I knew everything was in plain sight. But that's how it was. She left. And with that, everything between them fell apart. In the following days, Ethan packed away memories, clothes, books. He left that house with the lightness of someone who no longer wanted to fight for someone who had already chosen another path. The apartment remained, but the house that existed there died that day. Time passed. The months slipped away like sand through his fingers. Ethan slowly rebuilt himself. He started writing again, finding space in the silence to understand that loving also means accepting the pain of being left behind. He frequented cafes, reconnected with friends, immersed himself in new stories. Until she appeared. Not Olivia. But someone completely different. Someone who arrived quietly, without promising anything, without wanting to fill a void. She was a woman with her own past, with scars, with sweetness in her gestures and firmness in her gaze. And Ethan, though apprehensive, allowed himself to live again. It wasn't immediate. It happened gradually. As it should have been. As it always should have been. When Olivia reappeared, it was without warning. An ordinary afternoon, an unexpected encounter in a gallery. She seemed smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Her smile was the same, but her eyes no longer held any light. She tried to appear casual, asked how he was, how life was going. And Ethan answered honestly, he was fine. More than fine. He was at peace. She forced a smile, complimented his haircut, asked if he was seeing someone. He said yes. She froze for a moment, but maintained her composure. She disguised it. But when he mentioned the name of the woman who was now beside him, something inside Olivia crumbled. Because it wasn't just any name. It was a name she knew. A woman she knew. Not as a close friend, but enough to feel the stab in her stomach. It was a college classmate, someone she used to look at with a certain disdain. Not out of malice, but out of arrogance. A sweet woman, whom Olivia always considered too simple, too passive, lacking sparkle. And now, there she was, occupying the place that had once been hers. Ethan didn't say that to provoke her. He said it naturally. Like someone speaking of a choice without doubt. Olivia tried to change the subject, but her eyes were brimming with tears. He noticed, but didn't comment. He only asked if she was all right. And it was there, in the middle of that calm environment, between hanging paintings and soft lighting, that Olivia broke down. She recounted that her boss never wanted a commitment. That the affair was intense for a while, but then he distanced himself, cooled off, made it clear there was no room for anything serious. She said she felt used, discarded, that she thought about going back, but was ashamed. That the apartment seemed bigger, colder, emptier. That sleeping alone was the least of her problems. The worst was waking up and realizing she had destroyed the only real love she had ever had. And that now, she couldn't go back anymore. Ethan listened to everything in silence. Not out of coldness, but out of maturity. He had already cried enough. He had already felt all the pain he could feel. Now, only understanding remained. When Olivia finished speaking, the silence between them was broken by one last question from her, if there was still room. If he, in some way, still thought about everything they had lived through. He answered tenderly, but without hesitation. He said yes, that he thought about it. That he remembered it fondly, that none of it had been in vain. But that he didn't want back someone who had chosen him last. That he couldn't give space to someone who had already had it all and yet still chose to leave. Olivia cried. She didn't beg. She didn't try to force it. She just cried. She watched him leave again. But this time, unlike the first, she understood what she had truly lost. It wasn't just a relationship. It was a man who loved her deeply. It was a story that could have lasted a lifetime. And the cruelest thing of all, she lost him to someone she never considered a threat. She lost him because she thought she could always come back. Because she believed he would wait forever. But nobody waits forever. And nobody who truly loves each other stays where they are no longer wanted. Ethan walked out of the gallery with a light heart. Not out of pleasure, but out of relief. The pain had passed. The love had changed. And finally, he was free. Free from doubt, from guilt, from fear. Free to love again, lightly, reciprocally, truly. And deep down, even without saying it, I knew that this reunion wasn't a coincidence. It was the necessary ending to give meaning to everything. So that Olivia could learn, even if late, that true love doesn't happen twice in a lifetime. And when you lose one, you also lose a part of yourself that will never be recovered. Life went on, as it always does, even when hearts aren't ready for the next step. The weeks passed with a different weight for each of them. Ethan returned home with the serenity of someone who no longer needed to look back. His routine now had a different rhythm, different company, a different meaning. The woman by his side, serene and genuine, filled the empty spaces with lightness and presence. They weren't living a fairy tale, but they were living something that resembled peace, and that, for him, after everything, was what mattered most. They shared comfortable silences, mature decisions, and simple gestures. They made plans that didn't come with the anxiety of needing validation, but with the tranquility of knowing they were in sync. Life beside her wasn't made of upheavals, but of stability. And Ethan, who had once been nothing but waiting, was now a daily choice. For the first time in a long time, he felt he belonged to someone who also wanted to stay. Meanwhile, Olivia faced the echo of the choices she had made. The world around her didn't collapse all at once, it crumbled slowly, like an old structure beginning to crumble under unsupported weight. The affair ended indifferently, without drama, without tears, just with the typical coldness of someone who was never truly involved. The apartment that once symbolized freedom was now just a silent place, where not even music could fill the void. She tried to rekindle old friendships, but realized that many had drifted away. She tried to find her center again, but no longer knew where to look. The professional success that had been her anchor for so long now seemed small in the face of the absence of a home, of a gaze, of certainty. The days became a succession of silent regrets, of thoughts that returned to what could have been and wasn't. Looking at herself in the mirror became a daily exercise in confrontation. She no longer saw the strong and determined woman she used to admire. Through someone who stumbled over their own choices, someone who traded an entire life for moments that left nothing concrete. She tried to fill the void with new distractions, new encounters, new routines. But everything seemed smaller, faded. Nothing had that same sparkle anymore. No conversation lasted, no presence felt complete. And then, alone in her silence, Olivia began to understand the true weight of what she had lost. It wasn't just a partner, it wasn't just the love of a good man. She had lost his respect, the trust that had taken years to build, and most painfully, she had lost the best version of herself that only existed by his side. Ethan wasn't just someone who loved her, he was someone who made her a better woman. And by betraying that, she also betrayed her own essence. There was no going back to where she had come from. Time doesn't forgive those who didn't know how to value the present. The biggest shock, however, came months later, on an ordinary morning, when she decided to go for a walk in a park they used to go to together. It was an impulse, an attempt to reconnect with some good memory, with some recollection that wouldn't hurt so much. And it was there, on the wooden bench under the trees, that she saw him. Ethan, smiling, with his new partner beside him, embracing, while she held a small pair of white shoes in her hands. His new partner was pregnant. And Ethan. Ethan was pure light at that moment. A serene, happy, whole man. Her world stopped. She felt her eyes blur, her heart race, her legs weaken. What she saw there wasn't just a former partner moving on. It was the brutal confirmation that the love she had thrown away not only survived, it flourished, without her. And it flourished with another. With someone who knew how to care, respect, and stay. She didn't try to get closer. She just watched, with the silent pain of someone who understands, too late, the true value of what she had. She went home in tears, not of anger, but of loss. Not of jealousy, but of regret. For the first time, she understood that some choices are irreversible. That certain mistakes exact a price that is paid forever. And while Ethan built a new family, she began to live with the ghost of what she had destroyed with her own hands. She tried to write a letter, but didn't have the courage to send it. She tried to call, but stopped before pressing the button. Because she knew, with absolute certainty, that there was no longer a place for her in that story. The page had been turned. And she was just a stain at the bottom of the page. Ethan, on the other hand, harbored no hatred. He carried no resentment. He had forgiven, internally, long before their reunion. Not for her sake, but for his own. Because he understood that love shouldn't be a battlefield where one dies every day waiting for crumbs. He learned that when love demands you give up your peace, your dignity, it is no longer love. Time taught him that there is no victory in remaining in a place where you are no longer valued. The real victory is managing to leave, rebuild yourself, and rediscover happiness without having to step on anyone. He never sought revenge. He sought peace. And he found it. In the smile of the woman beside him, in the gentle touch of her hands, in the plans they were now making for the arrival of their child, and in the certainty that true new beginnings don't need to shout to be grand. Their story, which began with a deep connection, ended cruelly. But not unjustly. Because life, in the end, gives back exactly what was offered to it. Olivia offered disloyalty, indecision, pride. She received loneliness. Ethan offered love, patience, integrity. He received a new chance. And this is not by chance. It is a consequence. It is destiny adjusting itself. Now, tell me, you who have made it this far, what did you think of this story? Leave your comment with your opinion. We want to know how this story made you feel. Have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, take advantage now and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next impactful stories we'll be bringing you here. And let this story serve as a reminder, betrayal is not just a physical act, it's a profound emotional rupture. It destroys homes, breaks trust, and erases futures that could be beautiful. The truth is, when you betray someone who loves you, you don't just lose that person. You lose yourself, you lose respect, you lose the right to return. Because broken trust cannot be mended with promises, and wounded love cannot be repaired with belated tears. We will never romanticize or support any kind of betrayal here. Our commitment is to the truth, to real emotions, and to the responsibility of showing how choices shape lives. May each story told here be a warning, a mirror, and above all, an invitation to live with more truth, more respect, and more love.